Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be talking a bit about the David Jiricek trade that was completed back in November. Now that the dust has settled a little bit on the deal, we've seen him play now for the NHL club a little bit. I wanted to break down kind of what the team paid for him, why they felt he was worth that price, break down how well he played during his 6 game stint here and why he ended up getting sent back down here yesterday. So the prize of this trade is obviously David Jiricek. He is a 6'4", 209-pound right shot defenseman. He was taken sixth overall in 2022 out of Czechia. He's just 21 years old, and he has a ton of upside physically and offensively, in addition to being a really, really solid defender. Looking at his AHL play, he is very clearly talented with the puck. In the 23 or the 22-23 season, in 55 games played, he had 38 points. And then last year in the 23-24 season, in 29 games played, he had 19 points and then picked up 11 points in 14 playoff games. Also last year, he had a very long stint in the NHL. He had 43 games played and managed to knock 10 points. Uh, Part of the reason why Columbus ended up dealing him is he was constantly getting moved between the NHL and AHL. As Greg Wyshynski mentions in this article, that took place over 3 different head coaches and 2 different front office regimes. Juracek expressed openly that he felt he was ready to play in the NHL and was ready for big minutes. He had just come off of playing 43 games. The new front office, headed by Don Waddell, in Columbus disagreed, and that kind of sparked Juracek requesting the trade out, and the Blue Jackets eventually dealing him to Minnesota. There was a ton of speculation as to what exactly Columbus was looking for in a trade like this, because these trades don't happen very often. And so Waddle kind of set the bar of the trade as being a first round pick and a roster player of some kind as like the bare minimum starting point. And so I thought that the trade would include their first round pick this year. I thought it would include Damon Hunt, which it ended up being. He ended up being a big part of that trade. I thought it would include Caden Bankier and then maybe a very late draft pick in addition to that, like a sixth maybe. And the reason I thought that it would be Bankier instead of additional picks is I thought that Columbus would want more of that kind of NHL ready or on the cusp of the NHL young prospect players rather than a lot of picks for later drafts. And the reason for that is I think Columbus is very much kind of on the up and up. I think they're right on the edge there of contending for a wild card spot. And so I thought they would want more pieces that could help them in the more immediate future as opposed to stashing some day 2, day 3 picks that they could use later. So that's why I threw Bankier in. It ended up being more pick heavy than I initially thought. And I think a little bit of that centers on, I think the Wild did have to outbid some other teams for Juracek. And so I think that's why you see maybe an extra pick beyond what you might otherwise expect thrown into this trade. So, what exactly did Minnesota have to give up to get David Jiricek? They obviously got him. They also brought in a 2025 fifth round pick in exchange for Damon Hunt, a 2025 first, a 2026 third, a 2026 fourth, and a 2027 second. So a lot of stuff going the other way to Columbus in exchange for Juracek and a later draft pick. So in terms of the assets they gave up, Damon Hunt is a 22-year-old left shot defenseman. He's 6'1". He, to me, kind of tops out as a bottom four pairing guy, probably is a mid to high tier third pairing dude. He plays a really good two-way game, and is still working on kind of refining that play to be at the NHL level. I think he's right there. He probably could have played for Minnesota this year, if they didn't have a couple other guys on their left side right now. Um, but I think he does have a very solid chance of sticking to Columbus's roster next season. He plays on the side that Minnesota has less uber talented prospects in front of him. So he was kind of the cream of the crop for our left side D-men. But you look at the current roster and you've got Jonas Brodin, you have Jacob Middleton, both of whom play on the left side and are here probably for at least a couple more years. So Damon Hunt is already pushed to the third pairing. And then you combine that with, in this last draft, you get Zeev Buium falling to Minnesota. And he's expected to sign with the team at the end of the NCAA season this year. So at that point, Hunt is expendable in the prospect pool because he's not going to play above Middleton, he's not going to play above Brodin, and he's not going to play above Buium. So at that point, he's just kind of sitting as a seventh defenseman. So that's kind of why the Wild felt that they could move on from him. If you're bringing in Jiricek as a guy who is going to play long term for this team, has a clear long term spot, and has a much higher ceiling than Hunt does. They also gave up that 2025 first. That first round pick is top 5 protected this year. I don't expect it to come anywhere close to that. I think it'll probably end up in the mid to late 20s, kind of depending how healthy the team can stay for the remainder of the year. And the other thing to note is this draft class, in my opinion, is pretty top heavy. There's nobody that projects like David Jiricek at like in the mid 20s. And so I think the team felt very comfortable giving up that draft pick and Hunt as like the main two pieces to get Jiricek. And then obviously they added the top 5 protection on because this is a very top heavy class. If they're picking in the top 5, they obviously would like to keep that pick. And then in that case, it would just slide to 2026. Now we're getting into kind of the what I think may have been throw-in picks to kind of sweeten the deal. That being the 2026 third and 2026 fourth. That third round pick was originally owned by the Colorado Avalanche. Minnesota acquired that in the Brandon Duhaime trade. And the fourth round pick was originally owned by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they acquired that in the Connor Dewar trade. So those are both picks that were just extra ones the team had, and so they felt they could add them in as kind of an extra incentive on their offer to Columbus. And then they added on the 2027 second round pick. So many years down the road, at that point, Jiricek could be he could have blossomed into a very, very nice player. And so I think the team right now, to me, feels like they are they're entering their win now mode. Jiricek has size that the Wild's D core currently, or not currently, but their prospect core lacked. And he has a ton of upside that I don't think you could get a player remotely of his caliber at any of the picks that they gave up. Additionally, they already have an incredibly deep prospect pool. They're going to run into the problem of a lot of these high-end guys they're going to struggle to find spots for on the NHL lineup. And some of them are going to end up playing in the AHL probably for an extra year or two. And so I think Guerin is shifting his focus of we don't need to hoard draft capital as much. We can start to kick out some of these picks if it means we can get very talented players right now that help the team more immediately than a future second or a late first this year. I think Jiricek ends up being a very high end second pairing guy. Again, he plays on the right side. I don't think he's going to unseat Brock Faber. He may bump Spurgeon down the lineup next year, kind of depending on how Spurgeon is looking with his injuries. But I think he also has the potential to be a very solid power play guy. I think you could use him to give Faber a little bit of a rest uh, on that power play. And I think that Jiricek could end up being kind of a 40 to 60 point per year player. So I think with this trade, more than anything, you are trading for the potential Jiricek has. Keeping in mind that huge trade package the Wild gave up for him, one I would like to compare it to, and you'll see why here in a little bit, is the trade that Utah made with Tampa Bay for Mikhail Sergachev. Utah ended up trading JJ Moser, who's 24 years old, very young, very talented, has good upside as a defenseman. They traded Connor Geekie, who's 20 years old. He's the former 11th overall pick. They gave up a 7th round pick and they gave up a 2nd round pick. So, looking at guys that have kind of the size, the offensive upside, they tend to fetch huge prices. And so I'll talk about why I wanted to compare him to the Sergachev trade in a minute, but just kind of keep that trade in your mind of that comparison of value as we jump into how well Jiricek played during his 6-game stint here in Minnesota. So overall, I think David Jiricek played really, really well in his obviously very short stint this season. He only played 6 games, where he had 1 goal, 1 assist. He had .33 points per game on roughly 12 minutes of even strength time on ice per game. The nice thing is he played a very similar stint with Columbus earlier this year. And so it kind of gives us the ability to compare where this stint was compared to where it was when he was in Columbus. And based on some of these advanced stats, you can tell that he improved quite a lot. They have pretty similar dangerous Fenwick 4 percentages and Corsi 4 percentages. But the really nice thing is he massively improved his relative dangerous Fenwick 4 and relative Corsi 4 percentages from his stint to Columbus to Minnesota. So in Columbus, that relative dangerous Fenwick 4 was a negative 6.9, and the relative Corsi 4 was a negative 9.1. Basically, what those negative numbers mean is that those values, when he was on the ice, were 6.9 points lower and 9.1 points lower, respectively, compared to when he was off the ice. So he was dragging the offense down a bit with the Blue Jackets for a couple of different reasons. It could be his deployment. It could be the thing that was constantly talked about as being his biggest weakness, which is his skating. But when obviously he gets to Minnesota, he plays a very similar stint, and those relative differences both drop to a negative 0.5. So he looked a lot better. He's not dragging the offense down at nearly as much as he was in Columbus. And I think a big part of that is he looks so much more confident for the Wild than he did for Columbus. If the skating was truly his worst aspect of his play and what he needed to work on the most, this was an absolute steal of a trade for Minnesota. He skated very well, in my opinion, for a 21-year-old defender. And he produced in really big moments. I can't show the clip because of copyright reasons, But the clear instance of this that comes to mind was during their game against Colorado. Uh, Jiricek ended up with the puck on the blue line, kind of in that top corner, and he breaks one of the Colorado players' ankles up by the blue line and starts to drive the net. He dances around two other defenders before teeing up Trennan for a very nice goal. And so what stands out there beyond the puck skills and the skating ability was he has incredibly good hockey sense for a 21-year-old. He knows that as he's driving the net from that side, he's going to probably end up shooting backhand if he takes a shot. And he's probably not going to get that goal, but he knows Trennan is there who can take that forehand shot and probably has a better angle on the net than he does. So he knows that he can pass that and has a much higher likelihood of scoring. And so that kind of hockey sense is fairly rare in these young defenders. And so getting him for that price, again, it's an absolute steal of a trade. And so looking at some more of his stats, one main point I want to look at is his points per 60 minutes number. So in Columbus, that number was a 1.81. Here for Minnesota during that 6-game stint, it was a 1.66. The reason why I brought up the Sergachev trade is because if you look at Money Puck and you look at guys that are in that range of that points per 60 minute for defenders, the two that jump out to me are Mason Lohrei for Boston, who is at 22 points per in 44 games played, and Mikhail Sergachev, who's at 30 points in 44 games played for Utah. And Sergachev's at a little bit lower, so is Lohrei, but you look at how both those guys project for a full season, and you're getting into that 40 to 60 point per year range. And so I think when you compare the Sergachev trade to the Jiricek trade, again, Sergachev goes for J.J. Moser, Connor Geeky, a second and a seventh, and Jiricek went for a first, second, a third, a fourth, and Damon Hunt. The value of those trades isn't that far off from where you would expect based on other players that have been dealt. And Sergachev is a pretty similar build to Jiricek. And so I think if the Wild can give Jiricek power play minutes, they can pair him well with somebody on that second line or in that second pairing for defense, he could easily hit that 60 point per year player, and that would be phenomenal as a second pairing defenseman. So if Jiricek has been playing so well, then why did he get sent back down yesterday? Unsurprisingly, the reason has to do with the team's current cap crunch. Kaprizov, thankfully, is expected to be back tonight versus Utah, and so is Spurgeon. And Kaprizov's coming off of LTIR, so they need to open money up so that they can be within cap constraints. That those Parise and Suter buyouts really, really hamper what moves they can do. So Michael Russo does a great job kind of outlining they really only had 3 real options that they could do that would result in them being cap compliant with Kaprizov and Spurgeon coming back. First, they could put Brodin on LTIR if they think he'll be out until February 1st. He hasn't started skating yet, so I think it's a pretty good chance he is out until then. The issue is the more they utilize LTIR, the less money they accrue for the trade deadline, and it really hampers any additions that they could make to really strengthen the team going into the playoffs. And so I think they want to not utilize that system as much as possible so that they can potentially make an addition at the deadline. Their second option is sending David Jiricek down to the AHL. He's obviously shown he belongs in the NHL, but he is waiver exempt, and he would get top end playing time in Iowa, and in all likelihood, he would be their power play quarterback too. So he would get a ton of minutes. He would be able to keep developing and keep playing while he's not on the NHL club. The third option is waiving Travis Dermott, and then reassigning him and Devin Shore, who I believe has already been waived and is still within that waiver window. But you would have to send both of those guys down to Iowa to open up the cap space necessary to activate Kaprizov and Spurgeon. And so your reflex might be, well, Dermott's not that. He's been decent. I think for a waiver claim pickup, he's been okay. And then Shore is an extra forward. Why wouldn't you send those two down and keep Jiricek, who's been playing really well? So as Russo shows here, the lines with Kaprizov and Spurgeon back have Shore being the 13th forward and Dermott and Jiricek being the two extra defensemen. So the key thing here is that the Wild are going to be going on a road trip here pretty soon. And so sending down Shore and Dermott as your 13th forward and 7th defenseman to keep just Jiricek, who would still be scratched in this based on these line pairings, doesn't make any sense. And so, especially since you know you can guarantee Jiricek that playing time in Iowa, it makes all the sense in the world to send him down, get him a ton of playing time, with the understanding that, yeah, if there's injuries, you're going to be the guy we're calling up to play. So I think that's why he ended up getting sent down here. And based on some comments that Hines made, it does seem like David Jiricek fully understands that Minnesota is in a huge cap crunch, and he has a good attitude knowing that he's going back to Iowa. He knows that he got this shot because of injuries, and he really made the most of every single minute he was on the ice. So I think he really proved that, next year, even this year, come playoff time, he could be a very nice piece for them to call up and have on the roster going into the postseason. So what do you think? Do you think that we gave up too much for Jiricek? Do you think that we got a bit of a steal for him? And how do you think that he played during his little stint here with Minnesota? Personally, I think he looked really good. I'm really excited about his future with the team. And I think the future overall looks really bright for the Wild. So let me know your thoughts down below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thank you.